thank you so much for coming, and hi everyone on Facebook Live on my group, and also some people here on Zoom. I would like to introduce you to Mary, who's here today to talk to us about this very important topic that we're going to talk about today. It's not just important, but also we don't talk about it. So it's important that we talk about this. And I'm just going to talk about Mary as I know her, and she's going to introduce us and her experience by herself. Mary is an amazing friend, easy to talk to, and she has this knowledge about areas where other people don't go to. And I have cherished her friendship for more than 10 years. Her knowledge when it comes to about, talking about special needs children, when it comes to death and dying and aging, most people would just listen to you and go like that. Mary just go in there and have the conversation with you, and then you come out with clarity that you have never had before, which is why I really, really wanted to invite her today, so that other people, other immigrants especially, could benefit from her wisdom. I always tell her she's dripping with wisdom because that's true for me. And I wanted to share her. I've been hiding her until now. So Mary, please tell us about, introduce us about you a little bit, about the end of life doula as well. You can connect it with that.
Okay. So my apologies, I'm a little nervous. I haven't been on Zoom like this for a long time. So so I am Mary Alden Goulart. I have worked with older adults for about 35 years, and over mostly in assisted living and retirement living and senior centers and so forth. Over the years, I realized that there was really something missing in me, but also in the work that I was doing. And I realized I watched a lot of people come to end of life. And I saw a lot of people kind of ignored and left behind. And I felt a real calling to get involved and make a difference in people's lives. And one of the challenges I saw was families didn't want to talk about it. It's a difficult thing to talk about. So the result was they would avoid the conversation, even when the journey of their loved one, usually an elder, they were definitely heading down that path towards end of life. And they were too afraid to talk about it. And in fact, not even when I tried to have the conversation with them to help them, they would avoid it. Ultimately, what happens when you do that is the person who's dying is not honored in the same way as if they're asked, what matters to you? What is it that you want? What are you feeling? So about 10 years ago, I really felt the calling to start doing this work. So I started taking classes. I trained with hospice. And then just naturally, clients started coming my way, and I've helped, many people at end of life, and several through the dying process. And then I became a doula, a certified doula. I would say my title is a late life transition specialist, and actually a life transition specialist, because it doesn't have to just be end of life. It can be the whole spectrum, really.
That is so awesome. Thank you. And that's so important, right? Talking about something that people are not talking, right? So Mary, what is end of life doula?
So an end of life doula, if you think about a birthing doula or a birthing midwife, they birth people in, they honor the families and work with the families during the pregnancy, with the mom especially, to prepare her for what's to come. to get her body ready and to help her understand, to have her questions answered so it's not so scary. And then through the birthing process, obviously they're there, the midwives are there helping with really whatever comes up. And it's not always predictable what's going to come up. So an end-of-life doula, also you could call me an end-of-life midwife. Basically, instead of honoring these beautiful spirits in, we're honoring them out. So we can be hired at any time. Sometimes we're hired early on when there's might even be months to go. We might help with all the legal documents, like having their advanced healthcare directives done, helping them plan different things for after they're gone. But what most of us do the most of is actually working with the family and the person who's dying, most importantly, to prepare them, if we have time, to prepare them for what could happen. And when they're actually in the dying process, making sure we're there with the family or whoever's involved. Often it's hospice as well. And we make sure that the environment is set up the way this person who is dying, the way they want it. And we answer questions while it's happening, and we make sure that they are supported in the best way that we can. And if we have the luxury of knowing them before they're actually in the act of dying, that's the best gift of all, because we know what's important. We know what their wishes are. We usually know the family pretty well. So it's easier to support them on the way out. A lot of times in our culture, we were so in denial of it happening and we don't want to talk about it, that it's hard for us to gently honor people out. It's like a struggle, don't die kind of thing sometimes. And this, with a doula, it's just accepting where we are and doing everything we can to keep that person comfortable. But there's a lot of other things that doulas do, but ultimately our job is to help people die with the highest quality of life possible. Even when you're dying, there's a high quality of life, and that's when you're supported and being taken care of and heard, and your family is feeling supported.
That is so amazing. One of the things that he said was about the birth doula. And for me as an immigrant, I never even heard of the word birth doula until I was pregnant with my second child. And somebody was like, you should get a doula. I'm like, what? So we call it midwife. And right. So I love the way you said that, you know, around the birth of child, you know, we surround the baby with a lot of support, and the mother also to welcome the baby to this world. But when it comes to, you know, death, we don't really talk about it. We just, because we don't want to think about it because it's our loved ones. And it's really amazing that what I understood was you doulas are like a grounding energy. You're emotionally grounded and helping the family get there before actually the person pass on, and making it comfortable for everybody. I really love that idea. When I heard about it for the first time, I'm like, duh, it should be like that, but we don't do it, right? So that is so awesome. And let's break it down, because we talked about the aging. We're saying aging, dying, and death. So let's talk about a little bit about aging. Now, when it comes to aging, and I know I have talked to you about this a lot, yes, one of my cultural shocks, and a lot of other people who come to this country, is the way we treat our elders. I still feel shocked when I see it. And of course, not everybody is like that in US, but where I come from, we honor our elderly. I know my grandparents, and we all take care of our grandparents in the home, and until, you know, they pass on. But coming here, there's a lot of negativity around aging. Not a lot of, there are people that keep their elderly at home, but not all of them, right? And we see elderly people in the homes, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but can you say, as an end of life expert, can you say a little bit about that, about the difference that?
Yeah, well, you know, in America, and this is, it's different for a lot of families, but in overall, it's a nuclear family kind of society where families break off from one another. They live in different, you know, states, different parts of the country. It's not, I mean, some families are this way, and certainly a lot of immigrant families who have come recently and settled, not even recently, but we're kind of separated. So it's usually the mom and the dad and the kids, traditional, or it could be, you know, any selection of adults in the family with the kids. And then the grandparents are usually maybe in the same area or maybe in a different state. So we don't have the big families as much as in a lot of other cultures. So that right away kind of separates the elders from the nuclear family, and the children are not usually raised with their grandparents in the house because of that. So, you know, in my family, we honored our elders. They were like, maybe that's why I got into this work. They were just so important to me, but they lived back east and we lived out in California. And so we couldn't have that closeness. And also we're, in general, and I'm making a lot of generalizations, I realize, we are a youth-focused society. And I feel like a lot of people don't see the value in their elders because they weren't raised with them around, and they weren't raised to respect the wisdom that comes along with aging. And having a grandparent who can share with them these most important life lessons that they've already been there and done that and learned these lessons. So, you know, again, it's generalizing a lot, but it has had an impact on us because most children are not used to hanging out with their grandparents. And in a family where it's a big community and everybody's together, it's those grandparents who are in the homes with the children and loving them and teaching them and guiding them. And there's just this natural respect that builds up inside. So I think that's part of the problem. And then again, the whole youth-focused culture in a lot of ways has kind of put older adults in the background a little bit, which is unfortunate, because they certainly have a lot of gifts, and then therefore people don't really know how to include them, you know?
Right, that is amazing. So just a follow-up question, do you think this kind of living works for Americans, for us long-term, like for our social life? Does that work?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, when you look at what's happening with a lot of elders where they're just being pushed aside and their value is not acknowledged, that's a problem. I dare say it might be part of the reason why we're seeing some of the dysfunction in our culture now. I mean, I'm biased because to me, elders are so important. I just don't understand how they cannot be, but that's because I was raised in a family like that. So it is very important. And I'm hoping, even with the change in focus with end of life, that more people are starting to be brave enough to talk about end of life. Maybe they'll be brave enough to reach out to their grandparents before they get to that point and say, and realize that there's so much richness in their lives that maybe they'll be willing to reach out to them and make that connection, because certainly for me, seeing a lot of older adults being pushed aside is hard to see. But it has become a cultural norm in a lot of families. And I don't know how you retrain that, how you teach people to start appreciating their elders, except to start working with the children again and pulling the children and the elders together, like through intergenerational programs. A lot of senior centers and adult daycare programs and even assisted living, they're starting to offer those kinds of programs that pull the children in. And and not just children, but, you know, college age students and that type of thing.
You are not biased. I've had this conversation with you many times because there are really cultural values that I brought from my country that I want to hold on to. There are things that I want to let go, and they don't serve me in America. I love America. America is my home. But there are values that I will not let go because the alternative is not a good one from what I see. And I still, like I said, I still feel very shocked. It doesn't get old. I've been in the US for 13 years and it doesn't get old. Every time I see that an elderly being, you know, put aside or discriminated or, you know, enough value, I still feel that like somebody is like stepping on my belly kind of pain that I feel. And I don't think we should let go of that. And I love the advice that, you know, kids can reach to their grandparents. But I also feel like, you know, I'm an optimist person. So I feel like, you know, cultural norms are meant to be changed by the culture. And one way we can do is conversation, people like you advocating for us.
Right.
Advocating for the elderly, not elderly yet, but, you know, advocating for them and then having a conversation, not just with people who have elderly, but, you know, everywhere. I hope that you do that for us, you know.
Yeah, and you know,
but
in your book, you talk about how when people come to this country, you know, it is so important to assimilate in and find your place and your comfort, and to adjust to some of the norms or ways of living that are common in America, but not essential. But even more importantly, is to hold on to those values that you as an immigrant, and we're all immigrants, whether our families have been here for 200, 300 years or
right.
But to hold on to those values that are important. And in fact, I'm glad you talked about that, because in fact, the immigrant communities already have changed some of that focus a little bit and do have the power to bring in these really important beliefs and morals about inclusion of elders, and model it to the larger community, that this is the way we do it, you know. And I think that could make a big difference. And certainly you know, any immigrant individual or community, they bring such richness with them. And maybe in the past, I remember long ago that, you know, if you immigrated from Italy or whatever, it was like, don't speak Italian, don't show your traditional clothing. It was like something to be ashamed of, or that you wanted to hide, but it shouldn't be like that. And we have all of you, me, but my family's been here for, you know, many generations, but those of you who are brave enough and strong enough and have chosen to come here, those gifts that you bring are invaluable. And from my perspective as a late life transition specialist and doula, I think sharing that practice of honoring your elders in a bold and out front way can make a big difference.
That is so awesome, Mary. Thank you for saying that, because you hit the nail on the head when you said that, because one of the things that immigrants are afraid to bring in is because they feel less, that they don't think, they bring values, right? And but I always say to people, there are values I'm not gonna let go, even if it kills me. I'm just gonna advocate for this, and I'm gonna talk about it, and I do not want to let go of it, because the other way is not working for America either. And to have those conversations and bring about change. Thank you so much for validating that and encouraging immigrants to hold on to what's important to them, because those are the values that nobody expects them to put aside, right, but to bring them to us, to the bigger culture, so that we can all benefit from it. So now you also talk about, let's go to the difficult part of the conversation, going back to what you do. Let's talk about dying and death. What are some of the biggest cultural differences between how people in the US and other countries talk about, plan for, and acknowledge death's inevitability, and share the news when it occurs?
Well, I mean, I'm not an expert in other cultures. I'm an expert in my own culture and my own part of my own culture. From what I have seen in a lot of other cultures and people who have immigrated here, because the families are more cohesive and live together, that all phases of life are honored. And that there's not as much, and I am not a cultural expert really, so I'm just speaking from my personal opinion, but there's not as much avoidance about the conversation about end of life as there is in the United States, from my point of view. So I just think it's really, I think having the conversations and honoring people who are getting to that point, it will shift so many things. And I know from the studies that I've done that there are a lot of cultures that are there. I mean, they never leave the side of a person who is dying all the way through the dying process. They're taught it from a young age, so it's not as scary. It's like, hey, if we're born, we're guaranteed we're going to die. And when we get to that point, there's just as much involvement and interaction with the person who is dying as there is somebody who is a mother who's getting ready to birth. And then actually working with the body after it dies, after the person dies. That has been a real difficult thing for us to re-assimilate into our culture. People sometimes don't even want to look at a dead body, and certainly wouldn't want to touch a dead body. And so therefore they separate themselves from it. So I just really advocate for people to understand more about what is important while you're living, and to carry those values through all the way through the dying process. And then to honor somebody all the way out after all the way through the death. And again, it's going to be hard for a lot of people, but if we start talking about it more and not avoiding the conversation, it will gradually get easier for people. And when you have people like myself and other doulas who are not afraid to have the conversation, I can help people help pull out what matters to them. Gradually, one death at a time, one family at a time, people will start realizing, wow, what a difference it makes to be engaged through the dying process. Because one of the things I've learned is that with a lot of families that I've worked with, when a loved one has died and there has been a disengagement in that process, or the idea of, oh, mom, you just got to keep fighting. You got to keep fighting. You know, she might be 95 years old and have multiple issues and still pushing her to fight to keep living. When that person dies, there's often a tremendous amount of guilt because, and I've heard it over and over, I wish I had listened to what my mom was saying or my dad or whoever. I wish I had not been so focused on trying to help her survive her cancer, but more focused on helping her have quality of life while she was living, instead of telling her we don't want her to die. And just over and over, all these regrets around what happened at end of life, because they were afraid to have the conversation, because a lot of people feel, if I embrace death and I talk to my mom about it and I ask her what she wants or what's the most important thing for her as she's dying, that somehow I've given up on her. And I just felt like I had to fight so hard to keep her alive so she knew how much I loved her and didn't want her to die. And this brings in the hospice question. There's a lot of people who avoid hospice because they feel like if they accept the offer of hospice, that they are giving up on their loved one, that they don't care enough to keep fighting. And actually the contrary is the truth, because when hospice comes in, if you get the right support, and which also doulas really help with hospice as well, kind of like a birthing doula helps in the hospital. Hospice provides so much support and so many services that allow a person who's dying to stay at home for up to 6 months, and so oftentimes when hospice comes in, because the care is so good, one, it gives the family a tremendous amount of respite and comfort. A lot of times people, once they go on hospice, they get better. It doesn't mean they don't end up dying, of course they end up dying, but what I'm saying is that they get better well enough to go off hospice. They have quality of life, and then the illness will often come back, or because they're old, then they'll end up dying anyway. But by avoiding hospice and waiting till the last minute, the family, the loved ones, and the person who's dying are struggling more because they're trying to do it on their own because they don't want to admit that this is what's happening. So I'm just tying that into the conversation because it's a big challenge for doulas to try to encourage families to, it's not our decision, but to help educate them about the benefits of having hospice. And it can really make a big difference.
Wow. Mm-hmm. That's deep, right? That's really deep. And you talked about a lot of stuff. Just to share Eritrea and Ethiopia, because I lived in both countries, the experience of the dying and death process is a little bit different, which is why it's a cultural shock for me here. I'm just going to say a little bit about that. The elders stay with the parents, like I said before, or with the sibling, or they share them. And I still see some Americans maintain that. And I really feel happy when I see that. And then when it comes to dying, you are there. We are one of those cultures, she said, we are prepared to be there. It's part of life and we need to be there. And this person was our loved one, and then we need to be there. And I'll share one of my cultural shocks that you assisted me with. And after the death occur, also there is a part where people gather around, and the neighbors and people that the family know, family members, extended family, and they come there and they mourn together. And I think it's 12 days. I have to check with my mom. I think for 12 days, you are not alone. Those people come with you, and then you mourn. And if you feel like crying, you can go ahead and cry. And then other people will join you and they will cry for the person. So they help you with the grieving process. So everything is like a ritual that goes with that. So that's about Eritrea and Ethiopia. I don't know about other cultures, but it would be nice to know what other immigrants practice they bring to us, so that we can talk about that too. Now, one of the stories I want to share is that Grandma Sue. Grandma Sue was one of my friends that I acquired. She was 88 when she died, and she took buses wherever she went. She was an artist. She was an amazing human being. And when she died, she fell at home. She was an elderly, and she fell at home, and they took her to the hospital. And all over the place, her parents and the family, and I mean her daughters and sons and grandchildren, they came to see her, which was nice, at the hospital. And then at the end, they sent her to hospice. And so the day she died, I went there with my mom. I was going there every week because I live in Livermore and she lived in San Jose, and she was there being treated. And I saw her one day and she said, "Oh, I'm alone." And, she was fine 1 minute. And nobody was there. And I asked, "Okay, did people come see you?" And she said, "No." And apparently I found out later that people stopped coming. And I don't know if you remember that. I called you crying because
Yes,
I felt so impacted by it. And it still haunts me. I'm like, what? This is the time that she needs someone right now. She's gonna be dying, and she's gonna be dying alone. And all her friends, and this is not it's a judgment, but it's a shock to me, because that's not the way I was raised, because that's when people need you, right? You need to exit with grace and honor and love and all that. And at the end, the next week I went, and that's when I took my mom, and she was dying. And it's not easy. It's not easy being in front of a dying body. But she was there. She was still my Grandma Sue, and I held her hand and I talked to her, and I said so many beautiful things that she used to tell me, things that she was a funny woman. And I said that to her, and I said, "You know what, Grandma Sue, I'm gonna come see you." And then I thought about it, and I said, "And if you need to go, it's okay to go. Just save a spot for me. We still don't know who's gonna go first." And I went crying, and she died after we didn't even arrive to Livermore. It was like not even half an hour. She died, and I felt her hand around me when she did like this, even though she was almost unconscious, and I saw a smile on her face. And that was something I'll cherish for the rest of my life. And because she's my friend, but I wish her family witnessed that. I'm sorry. I wish they saw her smile, and she left with grace. And I want to thank you for helping me. I called you afterwards because I didn't know how to deal with it, because I saw her being really awesome, and then 1 minute, and then another minute she was dying, and it's not an easy process. That's where you came in, and you asked me questions. You told me you made my heart, you put it at ease, because it's not easy seeing a dying body. So I really admire what you do. We need more of you, seriously. And the other story I wanted to share was when you said that we don't have a conversation about people dying. In my culture, we don't have the conversation. Yes, we are there when, supporting when somebody dies, but not prior conversation. So, right. We don't have that. And I had the experience when my son, Aaron, who has cerebral palsy, was hospitalized, and the thought of, oh my God, he could die, came to my mind, and I was freaking out. even to go in my mind, the possibility of maybe what if it happens was really scary to me when I called you also, and you guided me gently, trying to avoid it. You guided me, and I did what I needed to do to accept that as part of life, and that could happen to my little boy. And it's so hard, but at that point, accepting that made me so strong in holding his hand and say, it's okay, you got this. Whichever way, right? Whichever way. If I didn't have that conversation, I'm just freaking out. So I wanted to share that with others, because those are some of the things that you do for people. And it is so important. I can't emphasize that enough.
Yes, and it changes the entire experience for really almost the whole family. Those people, especially those people who are present or involved in an end of life situation, they're forever touched. It can be a good touch and it can be a not so good touch, but that's what we as doulas do, is we help people embrace the reality that death is coming. And when you can talk about it and you can share your concerns and your fears, it doesn't take away the pain. It doesn't change the fact that mom or dad or, God forbid, son or whoever are going to die. But the willingness to talk about it and embrace the reality and to realize this is part of life, and the best thing we can do for this person who is dying is to be present, not just physically present, but to be there emotionally and spiritually. And I have a sense that there's a big end-of-life doula movement right now. There's a lot of people who are showing interest in this. And I think part of the reason why is because they too are feeling the void of a culture around death that can embrace it. And it's not easy, and it's always a loss. Sometimes somebody suffered a lot, so it's a relief in that way. But I'm hoping that doulas can help bring about a cultural shift that will make people more willing to embrace this reality that we all live. And by ignoring it or avoiding it, it's so dysfunctional, really, because it's inevitable. And so I know for myself, but I had a different background, but when I witnessed my grandmother dying with hospice, it was the most profound and actually beautiful thing I'd ever, it was sad, no doubt, but she was very old and she was ready to die. But honoring her out, it was like the most amazing gift after all the things she had done for me and all she was in my life and all the wisdom she shared. It was one of the most beautiful gifts that I could give. And my siblings were there and some cousins were there. And we basically vigiled around her for 4 days. And my aunt held space for us to all sleep in the couches and wherever we were. You know, we would just get up and just love on her. And that changed the trajectory of my life. And it also impacted my family so much that her death actually pulled us together. And there's a lot of times when people are not like adult siblings or family issues, and they're not coming together around a death, and there's a lot of reasons why. I'm not judging, I'm just saying, if you can come around and put your own stuff aside and be there to honor this person, it is so surprising at how it pulls families together and gives them something to strive for as they move forward without that person. There's a closeness, there's a shared experience, and it is really quite magical. And so I think one death at a time, one doula at a time, one conversation at a time can slowly change things. And I think actually there'll be a critical mass where if enough people start doing it, all of a sudden it's like death comes out of the shadows. I mean, because it's always been there and it always will be, but it's not so scary. And it's easier to discuss, and everything starts shifting around it.
Right.
And that's why I had said in a little note to you, I think it might have been on Facebook, it's not all bad. There is some very beautiful, life-changing things that can happen when you embrace death and you accept it for what it is and you make it the best it can be for yourself or a loved one or for a stranger.
Right.
And yeah, so there's a lot of things, even trainings that we're hoping to do in the new business I'm starting with 2 other really amazing end-of-life doulas. It's called Beacon Light Doulas. And we're hoping to actually get inside some of the assisted living communities and working with community groups where we can help educate them about supporting people at end of life and helping them understand the process, and knowing what to say is a big part of it. If you're not raised talking about end of life or death, or have never seen what it looks like, it is scary and it is completely uncomfortable. And that's why people want to avoid it.
Yeah.
Our job as doulas, and actually all of us, right? From the immigrants to people who've been here for generations, it's all of our responsibility.
Right.
It's a gift. It's a beautiful gift, and it's okay to embrace it. Doesn't mean you want somebody to die. It just means you're there for them and you're honoring them out. Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful. Beautifully said, Mary. And that's why you're a gift to all of us, because without those conversations, we're not prepared. Right? When it's gonna come, but when it comes, we are left feeling all over the place, and we're not gonna be there for people who are important to us at the end of their life.
And again, it does.
Important. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but it does make a difference in the healing process afterwards.
After, yes.
The impact that being present at a death, both physically and emotionally, and being willing to embrace it while it's happening, especially if you can have conversations with that person beforehand, it lightens the grief. It does not take away the grief, and it does not take away the need to mourn the person's death.
Right.
But regret is a very serious part of grief, and you really can't go back and do a do-over.
Yeah, you're right. That's also what I see among people when they talk about loved ones who died. Mostly that's what shows up is the regret. Oh, I wish I did this, or I wish I said that. So this conversation or having a doula allows for that conversation to happen before, so that they can heal. We all need healing, and I can't blame anyone. This is not a kumbaya kind of conversation, right? It's a tough conversation. I just wish we can have that conversation eating ice cream or at the spa.
Well, you could. You could. I mean, there are tools. That's another thing that we really are hoping to do with Beacon Light Doulas, is to make tools available for people to have the conversation, or to very gradually explore their own wishes for what matters to them in their lives. And when the time comes, what their thoughts are about that before it happens, and what their wishes are, around their end of life or around their loved one's end of life. So yeah, it's a priceless gift. And I think people who have experienced it and have had the support, I think they realize how positive it can be, even though it's not nice. You're muted tonight. There you go.
Yes, no worries.
I couldn't hear you.
I have so many questions because I want to poke your mind about this important topic, because you, like I said, you have helped me go through this like a wave, and I don't know what I would have done going through the story I shared about Grandma Sue, and then about my son when I thought he might be dying. But let me give a chance for anyone who might have a question for you. Let me stop being selfish for a little bit. If there is any question from the audience, just raise your hand, or you can type in the chat box about any of the stuff that we are talking about. If something comes up for you. Or if you got something out of what Mary is sharing, you can also type it on the message if you don't want to talk or ask a question. So I'll just keep an eye out for that. But until then, until I see any question or any comment, I wanted to ask you, and I wrote this one. How has Western medicine affected how Americans see death? Prepare for it, support those dying, and help others move through the grieving process. So we're talking about, what we need to do as doulas, or having a conversation in the bigger culture. But what has the medicine? How is it impacting us?
Well, I think for the last 100+ years, and Western medicine is amazing. I mean, it can save people's lives. It can prolong life. We're really blessed. I mean, you and I both have sons that wouldn't be here if it were not for the amazing things that medicine can do. But I think with a lot of doctors and in the healthcare system, at least in the past, it was like death meant defeat. And that it's like trying to do as much as we can, even though somebody is dying, say they've got terminal cancer, or they've got all these different things, and they really are just tired and they don't want to fight anymore. The push to keep trying new things and to keep getting biopsies, or to, whatever, surgeries, treatments, all of that makes death something that to a lot of healthcare providers, at least in the past, maybe it's shifting, that it's a defeat. And so it's put death, it's made death very negative, even more negative. In the last 60 years, it's like just doing everything you can to keep somebody alive, when sometimes the quality of life is so minimal, and the doctors just keep pushing and it's not just doctors, family members. I mean, there's family members who know that a loved one is, and I'm not making judgment. I'm just saying from my experience and the perspective that I have, someone who is brain dead, for example, and they're saying there's no chance that this person is going to live. They want the feeding tubes. They want to keep them alive, because somehow if their body is alive, they're not going to experience the loss. And so, I don't know, so Western medicine is a blessing, but it can also make it really difficult to give in to the fact that I'm dying and I'm just going to settle with that and let me have a really good quality of life. There's a lot of people who at their deathbed said, I wish I didn't have those last 2 surgeries, because I was already headed in that direction. And then my quality of life dropped down because I kept trying and trying and trying, and it didn't make a difference. It's very individual. People need to think about it on their own, but that's how I see it. That's the negative part of Western medicine. The positive is that people are getting years and years of high quality living most of the time because of our Western medicine. And when we can add in holistic medicine and other practices, mindfulness, and other things that bring quality of life, it can really change the situation. So there are the pros and the cons.
Wow.
Definitely a lot of pros as well.
Right. And I love that. Thank you. Because the Western medicine is so important for us, like you said, especially for me and you.
Yes.
It has its benefits a lot, but we need to be mindful. I really want to see you talk about this, in a national TV or anything for bigger impact. Seriously, because this is a conversation that we need to have as a culture, as a society. I just want to read something on the Facebook somebody wrote for you, Sagalet Bahta. She's saying, this is really interesting and educational. Thank you, ladies. And another guy, Yosef, says hi.
Yes.
So if you have any thoughts, you can unmute and say something, or you can type on the chat box if you have any question for Mary. Okay, Erica, I think she has something to say. Hi, Erica.
Hi, thank you so much for hosting this. It's really informative. I'm also an end-of-life doula.
Oh,
and
awesome.
Actually,
He's one of my partners.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice to meet you.
So I think about a lot of these topics a lot, but Mary, I was kind of wondering what your thoughts were on starting the discussion with families in a way that will sort of spark maybe some of those aha moments or deeper thinking on the topic of dying, since it is something that we all know will happen inevitably with families, maybe culturally or religious reasons. Just some families are more open than others to start the discussion. What are some things we could do to start talking with our families?
Oh, that's a really good question. If it's your own family, then you use your knowledge of the person who you want to have that conversation with, and we can often use ourselves as an example. Like if I had a family member who didn't really want to talk about end of life things, I could bring it up and say, for me, it's so important that you, as my brother or my sister or whatever, that you know what matters to me, and that it's okay to talk about it because it's so important. And this is what, and then talk about what it is. A lot of times, if it's a family, then you'll know other family members who have died and that type of thing. So it's using yourself as an example, and then just asking them maybe a simple question, a small question, like what is it that matters to you? Like, even if when you die, do you want to have, you could start with something light. Would you want to have a memorial? Would you want this or that? Just asking questions, starting to pull them out and showing them, we mirror to people what's okay. So mirroring back to them that this conversation is healthy, that it's a good conversation. And then when they respond, because they will have a response, you just listen carefully to that response, and then you ask another question related to it. And it's kind of the coach approach, listening carefully to what they say, finding something that they said that you can ask another question, and you can gradually lead them into the conversation. Not always easy. I have one sibling who just she just cannot handle the conversation. So even with her, what I do is I role model through the work that I do and the conversations she hears me have with other people, but I can't have it with her. She won't go there. So yeah, it's a good question. Erica, I turn it back to you. Do you have a tip or something that?
Yeah, no, I think it's similar for me when I really want to talk to my loved ones or friends and family. I'll use myself as an example, and I have a great example of having thyroid cancer 3 years ago, and it really did change my life, even though it's very treatable in terms of the way I viewed the world and what was important to me and the things that I was going to put as a priority in my life. Really did start to shift and change, as well as my thinking. It definitely is what led me to become an end-of-life doula. And so I think, I think that's a great way, is to just say, oh gosh, when I had thyroid cancer, getting that diagnosis was, hit me over the head with a bat, really, of course, like you would imagine. But the good that came from it and the transformation really got me thinking about what I wanted and what I wanted my family to know about my wishes. And so I was sort of forced, unfortunately, to look at those things closer in that situation. But I think, you know, everyone's got some health thing that they can relate to or use that as a window to open the discussion with their friends and family or anyone that really seems interested. And you just sort of take their lead and ask more questions to go deeper.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Erica. Yeah.
That is so awesome. Thank you, Erica, for sharing your experience and giving us a tip to have a conversation. And I have to say, I am very lucky that I've had this conversation with Mary so many times, that I have had that conversation with my parents already. It's really important to have that conversation. Then you know exactly what to expect later, instead of wondering, oh my God, I should have said this. I don't know, you know. So that is so important. And we're close to our time. But some of the key things that I got today is that why it's important to have this conversation, this difficult conversation. And I keep saying, and I hope, I wish we could have this conversation with an ice cream on our hands or something, but there's no way around it. It's good to have this conversation because Mary, you said something important, that it's important, especially for the healing process afterwards, because the guilt is going to eat you up, and oh, I should have said this, I should have said that. So having that kind of conversation is so important, and with the help of doula would be awesome, because they know exactly what to do. I see Elizabeth Wong raising her hands. I'll give you time in a bit, and let me just wrap it up. And you also mentioned doula helping to change how Americans support loved ones. We talked about, you know, immigrants bring, you know, their traditions with them, the one that we lost in America, and they can bring it. They can bring that gift, and then we can have a conversation, and they have to hold on to those values so that we also, who have been here, can learn from them. And that's their role as immigrants, not to forget that they are gifts. And we talked a lot about that. And what you guys do is really amazing. Erica and Mary, really, I don't even know, you know, how to explain it, but let me give Elizabeth Wang a chance. Okay, so you can unmute.
And Elizabeth is the other doula. Erica and Elizabeth are my partners.
Okay.
Speaking like doula.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, thank you, Sinead, for just hosting this forum for us. I mean, I'm an end of life doula, but I'm also a labor and delivery nurse. So about birth and death, I flank both sides. And Erica is a birth doula as well. But the only thing I wanted to add, this is great, is that when we often refer to the conversation, we don't want to give the impression it's one conversation. So when we talk about, that's why it's about starting the conversation, but really recognizing that, as you know, people have it may be a difficult conversation, that shouldn't deter anyone from starting it, because it's really a process of having multiple conversations and meeting people where they are. So as Mary was saying, there might be a loved one who's not ready to have a conversation, but just as importantly, it's just about holding space for them to just deal with what they need to do and giving them the time to process it as need be. So that's the only thing I wanted to add.
Oh my God,
Thank you, Elizabeth.
That is so amazing. And I hope this is not the end of it. And I hope you guys can enlighten us more on this conversation, because this is what we need to change.
Well, you know what, tonight, I know we're running out of time, but we would be happy to come back at another time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even more of our stuff all together. We're getting our website up and running, and we would love to have this conversation.
That is so awesome.
So and yeah, it would be our honor.
For now, I will share your, what is it called?
Business card?
The business card. See, I'm hungry now. The business card, and I can share it with the people that are watching on Facebook Live, and with everyone that I know, so that they can share that. See, it's 1 o'clock. So everybody's coming out. You can hear my mom at the background and my son. So I will share that with everyone. But thank you so much for this amazing conversation with me today.
Thank you, Sunai. I appreciate it very much.
And giving our community the hard conversation that we need to have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Erica. Thank you, Elizabeth, and everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye. Be well.